Hello everyone, how are you doing today? This past week I was looking through some Facebook group pages and watching a few YouTube videos on event flash photography because I'm always amused about the thoughts that go into flash photography, and I thought I'd make this video for all those beginners that want to start in wedding or want to do birthday parties for their family. My name is Vaughn. I'm an event photographer. If you haven't watched my channel before, I wanted to answer the basic questions in flash photography of, is TTL for beginners or is manual just for professionals? If you're new to photography or you just want to know more about event photography, then watch this video. So if you have an upcoming event and you've been using the auto modes without flash to expose in low light situations, then you're just like me. When I first started to take photos, I just put it on auto and I didn't use the flash, and I just let that pop-up flash come up on my old DSLR. That took some basic pictures, but over time I noticed that these photos had less details, and correcting photos in post with presets made by these photos seem boring and lifeless. So I'm here today to give you some tips on event flash photography. Different camera manufacturers use different flash technology. Like for this Nikon Z6 II, I think it's ITTL or intelligent look through the glass. It's all basically the same with Canon, Sony. They're all basically using flash and it's doing the same thing. So don't worry, you won't get lost. Basically what happens is you're still trying to control the light hitting your camera sensors, whether you're using a flash or whether you're taking it without a flash. By adding a flash, you're giving your camera more power to stop action. Also, you're adding life back to your photos with effects like catch lights in the eyes. Also with flash, you don't have to use high ISOs. And if you need to capture a large group, you can close down the aperture to an f-stop of 5.6 or even 7.0 and raise the flash power to compensate. Let's start with the first tip, the basics. So this video is for beginners or intermediates, so I'll try to keep it simple. The word flash and speedlight can be used interchangeably, so please don't get lost when I switch between the two words. First basic thing you need to know about flashes before we talk about even taking photos with a flash is what flash to buy. Now I can't recommend a camera manufacturer, so basically what you need is a medium powered flash like this one. This is a ESDDI. You can buy a more expensive one that has a higher guide number. You can look that up, I'll leave you a link for that, but the guide number basically is how strong the flash is. I don't want to talk about the math in this video because that would make it more complicated. This flash is an inexpensive flash, and I have another flash that I use for my DSLRs. It's from Neewer and they're inexpensive and they're a good start. Before you move up to the expensive flashes, you want to make sure that you know what you're doing while you're still an amateur. And this is a reminder, to use TTL or through the lens, make sure the speedlight works with your brand of camera. Don't buy a universal flash as a beginner to save money. Universal speedlights are manual. I wouldn't recommend these to beginners because they will gather dust once you learn flash settings. Let's take a look at the front of the speedlight. Let me move this out of the way. Let's move this over here. Okay. And let's take a look at the front of the speedlight. Let me turn it on. So this is the LCD panel and it gives you all the information. This is the pilot light and we're gonna flash that up here, and you use that for test firing of the flash. When you're doing photography, you always wanna look at the light because if it's blinking, then that means your flash is about to go out. That means the battery's low. Also helps you check the recycle time. And here is the mode button. So the mode button moves it from TTL to manual to multi, which is slave on this camera. And here are the adjustment buttons where you can adjust flash settings and the exposure compensation. If you have it in manual and you want to adjust the zoom, you can change the zoom. Up top here is the flash itself. I don't want to take a photo of that. And this is the flash diffuser, and it's used to spread the harsh light from the camera because you don't want to put that directly on their face, on your subject's face, because that's too harsh a light. So you use a diffuser to make the light better. You can bounce it off a ceiling, or you can bounce it off your shirt if you have a white shirt, and it'll bounce right back. And on top is a flash card. So you can use the flash upward and it'll bounce. You position it up and it'll bounce the flash right back on your subject. It creates a more flattering look instead of a blown out look. As a beginner, you need to know that 1:1 is full power on a speed light in manual. See, I have it 1:1. And as the fractions go down from 1:1 to 1:128, they're going down in stops. And so you need to be aware of your stops. Because if you're doing manual, then you need to adjust your camera in the same amount of stops. Basically, if you adjust the stops on your camera, then you have to adjust the same amount of stops in your flash. And you're doing this basically to compensate for the change of light. But I'll discuss that more in detail later in the video. Now, tip number 2, using TTL. If you're new to Flash and you want to play it safe, keep your camera in auto mode with TTL. TTL does all the adjustments for you. It meters and it adjusts the exposure for you. You can drop your exposure compensation to reduce the light if the exposure was too bright, or raise the exposure if the flash meter is too low. I know all this is puzzling, but after you do it for a while, it will come to you. So I'm using my test subject, Kate, and let's see what happens. I'll set my Nikon Z6 II to auto mode with TTL. So let's do some photos with TTL. Today, I'm gonna have Kate in my photo sessions, and we're gonna test out TTL flash. I'm using my Nikon Z6 II and it's set to auto mode. I'm using TTL on the flash. Move it to TTL. And as you noticed in the video, I have a white ceiling and I'm gonna angle the flash up to bounce the light off the white ceiling. When I do event photography, I usually use a diffuser, but not today. This is about showing you how to use a flash. Kate is in front of this white background, so the camera and the flash will try to expose the photo a little darker due to the ambient light reflecting from the white background. Now I'll move her to this dark corner with the same settings. Notice how the ISO goes up. Photo is now brighter due to the higher ISO and the flash trying to compensate for that. Flash is trying to balance the exposure. Now this is the problem with using the auto mode in TTL during an event. The camera and the flash are basically trying to figure out what to expose in the scene. The way to fix this situation is to go to manual with the camera settings and leave the camera in TTL. This is a bonus tip for beginners. This will help you find your comfort zone. Let's take the same 2 photos, but in manual mode. I'll adjust the shutter speed equal to the focal length. I'm using this 24mm lens, but for the focal length, I'll be using about 70mm. So 1 times 70, the rule, I should be at 1/70th, but usually in my event photography, I'm at 1/100th due to, people moving, and I want to make sure that in case I have a little camera shake, my hands are moving because I've been holding the camera all day, that I don't miss a shot or it's not blurry. And if there's kids, if I'm at a birthday party, then I'll have it at 125 shutter speed. Since I'm photographing in a low light situation, I'll have the camera at a f-stop of 2.8 or 4 for this photo. I will turn off auto ISO. I want the photos to have less noise, so I will go with an ISO of 1600. When your exposure meter and the camera shows 0 exposure, the flash doesn't have to work as hard. This will eliminate flash overheating due to lengthy events. Let's take 2 photos and see what we get. That's better. The settings and the bonus tip are a good starting point for most beginners. I want to give you some settings to help bring you to the light. Now, my settings may differ depending on whether I'm using a full frame or a crop sensor or APS-C camera. Now that you have mastered TTL, let's move on to manual. I know you have mastered, I'm just playing with you. Don't be afraid, learning flash event photography gets easier once you get your repetition in. Having repetition only makes you better. That's the reason why I have Kate, because I can do repetition. Please subscribe if this bonus tips helped you with flash photography. Now let's move on to manual. Using TTL is easy, but manual takes some practice. That's usually why professionals do it. But once you get your camera settings dialed in, then you have one half the battle. Let's use the camera settings from the bonus tips. Move it to manual, there we go. Select the zoom button and change the focal length of your lens. So we're 70 millimeter. So I'm gonna adjust the flash accordingly, depending on how much flash power I need. Chimping is allowed while you're dialing in the exposure, and don't be afraid to chimp. But while you're chimping, leave those comments, because I wanna know more about what your thoughts are about flash photography. Through my experience, I found that I get a more consistent exposure in manual mode on the camera and the flash. When I change the aperture, I adjust the flash power. For example, if I go down to an f-stop of 5.6 from 4.0, then I adjust the flash power up here to 132s and upward. The downside to manual is that if you're not accustomed to changing settings rapidly, you might get a little confused, because you might go into one room that's dark and then you'll go into another area and it's bright, and you'll have to change your settings. You do 2 stops down, then you do 2 stops up on your flash. And so you're basically doing 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, depending on, whether you're going in a dark room, a light room. But don't worry, even though chimping doesn't make you look like a professional, I will do it when I need to. If I don't look like a professional by chimping, then it's okay, because if I get the exposure right, then that's what the customers have paid me for, to get their photos properly exposed. It comes out in the end. It works its way out. I know using a flash might seem intimidating, but to become a better photographer, this is something that you might want to learn for your next event. Recently, I photographed a birthday party that had a casino night theme. I used TTL for the first time in about 3 years. I wanted to try different settings to dial in my exposure. I watched a few videos from some of my YouTube partners, and I wanted to see if those would actually work. But what I found out was I had more photographs that I couldn't batch process in Lightroom. And batch processing saves time, especially when you're taking 400 photos or more at an event. TTL doesn't always create consistent results. Manual, you can dial in for an area and get more consistent photographs. But remember, these are my opinions. Another photographer will tell you the opposite online, but that's the beauty of photography. You're trying to figure out what is your comfort level. I hope this video provided you with some tips for your upcoming event. As always, hit that like button and please subscribe, and thank you for watching.